Welcome. Welcome to our study of the Buddhist Psychology of Awakening by Professor Steven Goodman, which is really a pleasure to be presenting from the point of view of this provides, you can say, an access to something that is so important, and that is this project that we have in Buddhism, which is seeing through appearances. Understanding how our mind is constructed through causes and conditions, understanding how we exist through causes and conditions, and actually overall, and what we touched on last time, and I actually might just go back there a little bit, understanding that phenomena do not actually exist as truly existing. They don't possess inherent existing. The sofa across from me does not possess anything ultimately sofa about it. I might think of my dear sofa and I like this sofa, or I dislike this phenomenon. I don't like this politician, and isn't it wonderful that that politician is, etc., etc. So in this way, we construct solidity where there actually isn't any. There's a big difference between how the sage handles the world and how ordinary persons like myself, who attribute solidity to what in fact is just a mere idea, actually we get caught up in these patterns of like and dislike. This is how wars begin. This is how our personal suffering begins. This is how us and them begin. This is really it. And it's so important that we actually if we're on the Buddhist path, we're almost lost unless we really understand what it is we're doing in terms of penetrating this delusion of solidity. So let's, without further ado, go to Dr. Goodman's text. And we've come to a place where we're going to be talking about something that has happened. And this is important because this is where so much gets lost in translation, and it actually prevents us from being clear with others and also with ourselves. What actually is it we're doing on the Buddhist path? Let me just talk about one thing that we looked at last time, what we call the four extremes. And this is very often where people, they sort of just blank out and go, I can't get that. That must be very profound, really wonderful that Rinpoche is teaching this, and it's very deep and very profound, but I can't understand it. And but anyway, I'm sure everything will be all right. And that's true to some extent, but it is rather helpful when we are standing looking at a snake in front of us, that if we look a bit harder, we actually see there is no snake. It's just a rope. It makes a big difference. Standing in front of a brown snake and standing in front of a rope is a very different experience. And that's where the hoax that we fall for is this belief in solidity. Look, the people that we in one moment like, and then the next moment we get disappointed because they're not what we thought they were, they're just clearly acting on the basis of their causes and conditions, their various styles of, you could say, conditioning, and the impulses that come from that. And so, they are one way or another. There's nothing good or bad about it. The good and bad comes from our projection, our labeling. We're not saying this is not, this is not Sam, this is not Joe, this is not Peter, this is not Susan. We're not saying that these people are not there, but our labeling them as being in one way or another, that is an extreme. We think that things either are in one way or another. We basically think things exist, or we think that if they don't exist, then they're not there. So if someone says, well, there's no truly existing Sam, there's no truly existing Sue, then we might think, oh, but then there's nobody there. That's not what we're saying either. So do things truly exist? sorry, but there's nothing about that sofa over there that ultimately is sofa. Ultimately, there's none of the parts in the sofa that ultimately is sofa. If that were the case, and this is where sometimes, we get a bit sort of overwhelmed when we have these kind of logical lines of reasoning, because we say if that entire sofa is entirely sofa, then every part of it is sofa, right? Well, that would mean every little thread in that sofa is sofa, and it's not. It's the assembled condition itself. That's also not really sofa. That's just something that is there, but we label it in a particular way. And that's where we attribute existence to something that actually doesn't have existence. Please, I hope this will sit and bother you and nag at you and puzzle you, but I can assert this is what Nagarjuna, this is what the Buddha, this is what Chandrakirti, Shantarakshita, and Guru Rinpoche wants us to understand. Do things truly exist? No. Do things truly not exist? No. And once we have these two, then sort of beginning to say, well, they're both one thing or another, actually, it's just not possible. It's just not logically possible. We can also think about that if we like, or we could say they're neither. But either way that we do it, it's something that actually should sit with us. We should carry with us, and it should bug us. And it is there that we begin to see that things, they appear yet have no inherent existence. Important point. And this is where this point, which very often is left as something that, well, we think, oh, I'll leave it till later, I'll understand that later, and so on, because it's so essential for everything we do on the path in terms of our practice, in terms of the way that we act, the way that we engage, the way that we have our likes and dislikes, and all our actions are actually based on attributing existence and non-existence. It is an important point. So we shouldn't really leave it. We should resolve it. And that's what we call resolving the view. Tawa Tenla Baba. So, okay, now we have gone through that admittedly, but this is something that just is really worthwhile sort of revisiting. Okay, presently we're looking at misunderstanding self, soul, and ego in Buddhism. And this is also along the same lines, really. And it's wonderful that Steven is not just launching into, like we have on the left side, a whole line of categories that we could or could not learn, and then we could say, hi, I know, the 75, or I know the 51, and then we could claim to be knowledgeable, and other people will say, well, so what? Justifiably. And that's exactly what we're not doing. What we're doing now is not a so what. This is essential. So thanks to Steven, who's making this actually very clear and accessible, and actually coming at Abhidharma from these different angles. So valuable. Misunderstanding self, soul, and ego in Buddhism. Steven says, we've spent a bit of time talking about self and ego in the tradition of the Upanishads, because this kind of talk is extremely important in the Buddhist tradition. But since most of the early figures who translated the words of the Buddha into Western languages were conditioned by Christian thinking, we find absurd translations and thoughts, such as, Buddhists say there's no such a thing as a soul, ego, or self. You will have heard that. Perhaps to skirt these confusions, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says over and over again that the essence of all religions is love. I myself have never heard him give a teaching at an ecumenical conference in which he said there are two kinds of spiritual traditions, those who think deludedly that there is a soul, and those who know definitively that there is no soul. But so many people seem to take this business of the existence or non-existence of the soul as a matter of life and death. In Buddhism, there is the habit of saying that those who think that there is something called a soul or God suffer the wrong view of the extreme known as eternalism. On the other side, of course, those for whom the word soul or God is an opening, an ethical kind, a loving word, think, oh, those Buddhists, those nihilists, those God-denying heathens who pay no attention to the salvation and loving kindness of our Lord, they are to be pitied, they are to be converted, they are to be shunned. To summarize, this simple word soul has caused great confusion. So what we're going to look at here is what we have already established, that any given phenomena, whether it's material or non-material, is a dependent arising. It exists beyond the extremes of existence and non-existence. And when the Buddhists, they speak about no self, it's a critique on the assumption that there's an existing soul, because as we know, our mind is continually changing. So it's not that we're saying there's nothing there in terms of our cognitive capacity, but what we're simply saying is there's not a solid, unchanging condition there. And so that's where the notion of self is subjected to a critique that looks at, is there something that we could say is existent? No. And hence also it doesn't fall into a category also of saying that it's non-existent. And this, of course, is a big, you could say, debate between mind and matter in Western science, where on one hand you have those who say there's a soul and others who say there is no soul, there's only matter. And both of these are actually attributing existence, or you could say challenging the other, or essentially charging the other with non-existence. So that's why particularly then you could say those that claim that matter is the only thing that exists, they would charge those that for which soul is something that is eternal and absolute, with that being something that obviously it doesn't exist because it can't be quantified, it can't be measured, it can't be labeled, and so it falls into the category of non-existence. And then we have this whole, actually say, flawed debate between mind and matter, which has sort of run down through Western philosophy for a very long time. And all of these arguments are perfectly valid. It's not as if any of these philosophers are stupid people in any way, but there's a basic misconception, and that is where you could say the Buddha was brilliant in understanding that there's a relative truth in which things appear, and yet if we analyze, we won't find anything absolute about it. So that's why on one hand we have the schoolmen, or those in Western philosophy that try to make a proof for God, and those that will simply come and say, well, you know, we can't find anything except just some heaps that appear to constitute the experience of a self, or in recent time, then simply saying, well, there is no consciousness, there is no soul, which we have. This is what we call the limitivists, or the materialist monists, and this is a very common trend within present-day neuroscience. But all of that discussion is really based on this very confused, you could say, assumption that either things exist or they don't exist. And what we can see is, and that's my example with the sofa, etc., is that things do not fall into these categories of existence and non-existence. They're simply coming together of conditions, and there's nothing born, and hence there's nothing dying. There's nothing born about phenomena. There's nothing that's dying about phenomena. There's nothing born about the mind. There's nothing that's going to die about the mind. And so the mind, as much as we might be caught up in a confused projection about the mind, is not subject to something that all of a sudden becomes non-existent, because it's never become existent in the first place. Okay. Anyway, this is something that is going to be, we'll go over this again and again, but this is where we have these two extremes then, where we have those who say there is something and those who say that there's nothing. Okay. Now, obsessive fixity. The Buddhist meaning of the word Atman is obsessive fixity. Let's just see if this might just be this. Yeah. Okay. Obsessional fixity is permanent, singular, and independent. This is actually important because these are actually the ways that we mistake reality. We attribute permanence to what is impermanence. We attribute singularity to what in fact is conditioned. And we attribute independence to what in fact is dependent. So this is, you could say, if you want to sum up, if you want to have a little sort of summary of how our delusion operates in a flawed way, it is exactly on the basis of these three styles of obsessional fixity. I've never seen this expression before, but yeah, sure, obsessional fixity. Now, Steven says, you might ask, what does this have to do with the famous ego? Okay, then Steven says, let's explore how this famous self and ego as a good guy or a bad guy is used in Buddhism. Let's look again at the Four Noble Truths. The cause of suffering is said to be clinging, or Trishna, literally thirst. Take the metaphors of Buddhism in all of their concrete splendor. Trishna means you're suffering from thirst. You're so dehydrated that you obsessively think only of the one thing that will alleviate your thirst, as if you were dying. All you can fixate on is finding water. In the desert, you might even hallucinate its presence. The thirst is so strong that it might produce a hallucination. And the name of that hallucination, according to the Buddha, is that there is a self, Atman. And that is where we have then the first skanda, really, of this delusion that then attributes solidity to the subjective dimension of the cognizant subjective, and also the solidity of the projected phenomenal field. And that is then taken to be two different ones, but there's a solidification that goes on. And that's where we then speak about form, the first skanda, rupa. According to this metaphor, because this is based on an obsession, which is the cause for the continuation of suffering, this sense of Atman is taken as something bad, as discussed before. Now, bad here in the sense is, you could say, well, is a virus bad? Is a germ bad? Well, it's just anything, but for us, it's what really drives our sense of being unwell. And so similarly, you could say, well, sure, obsession, is that a bad thing or whatever? Well, it is what it is, but it drives our suffering. And that's why it's something that is, you could say, unfavorable for us. It's a problem. So from that point of view, yes, then this Atman is bad, but it's no more bad than, if there's a rock in the middle of the road when we're driving and our car hits it and damages our car, then the rock is a bad thing. But of course, we all know it's not as if the rock had a bad intention, or that there necessarily is anything other than just a thing that's there. So that's where we need to understand that bad here is really just relative to what it's doing, what the impact is. But yes, in terms of us projecting solidity onto our consciousness and to the phenomenal world, yes, then this notion of Atman, self, is bad. According to the Buddhist teaching, we thirst, Trishna, in three different ways. And Atman is the name given to the obsessive quality of our thirsting, to our obsessive fixity. I use the word Atman here to avoid its translation as ego, soul, and self. Atman is just a word that's used to talk about any of the three following kinds of obsessions that are the cause of suffering. Excuse me. Okay. So these three kinds of obsessions are, and they're significant because they drive our suffering. First, we want certain things to be permanent, to not change. Two, we want something to be unique, to have never happened before. Three, we want things to be independent, not depending on anything. And that's why we attribute, whether it's something that we wish for or whatever, then it is something that drives our sense of self. So whether it's like or dislike, we attribute a solidity to things as being in one way or another. Namely, it's solidly there, not changing, permanent. This is where even when we, like Tongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, you know, we might resent impermanence, but it also means that if we're in bad circumstances, thanks to impermanence, it might change into good circumstances. So this permanence is a delusional assumption. We take what is in fact impermanent, what is subject to change, etc., to be permanent. That's the first of our suffering, these causes of suffering. The second is we want something to be unique. Well, it's in the sense that we attribute uniqueness to phenomena. And in fact, where they're just conditions that have come together, we attribute self. I'm calling sofa, as if there was some essential monolithic, unchanging, unique identity in that, you could say, conglomeration, aggregation of thread and springs and what have you. So that's why we attribute identity, and that's then this quality of uniqueness, that we attribute something to have self. And then third one, we want things to be independent, not depending on anything. Meaning we would say, well, that thing there is just that. And nobody's going to deny there's a sofa. But what we're at here is if we analyze, then we'll see it's certainly not something independent. There's no basically, we would say if something were independent, free from any conditioning, well, it would be forever there. It would always have been there. It will be there forever. The moment that it's something that has come into being, lasts for some time, and then eventually falls apart, then it's not unconditional. It's not independent. So we need to be clear. This is not a matter of belief. This is not a matter of us Buddhists, they believe in impermanence. Like, no, it's just that if you analyze things, they are impermanent. If you analyze things, if they have identity, well, they're sorry, they don't. If you analyze things, whether they exist dependent or independently, well, they don't. This is not a matter of belief, you know? So you could say mathematicians, they believe 2 and 2 is 4. Sure. So does anyone who puts 2 and 2 together, right? So here we're not talking about belief. We're simply just analyzing, and that's where we're making a mistake, and we're clinging on to it. Stephen says, we regard, obsess, or plan about things as if they were permanent or stable, unique, and independent. Hence, all the practices on impermanence here refers back to our 3 friends from column 4. I'm not so sure. Is that column 4? I'm convinced. I think it's more over in. Oh yeah, no, it is. Sorry, Stephen. Yes, of course, it is in column 4, and it is then these 3. 66. Coming into existence, fleeting stability, and decay. That's basically what we refer to as coming and going, where we would say what the Buddha taught was that which is beyond coming and going. And what we suffer from right now is attributing, you could say, production or birth, then a momentary presence of some given phenomena, and then it's, you could say, dissolution or decay, that things end, beginning, existence, and then end. And these then are this is where we go wrong. And what we're simply talking about here is just a critique of our deluded assumption. So that's why we meditate on various ways of actually breaking through our thick-headed assumptions about phenomena. We can use impermanence, but we can also go a bit further and actually understand how things don't exist in terms of existing and not existing. You could say their way of being, their abiding mode of being, we could say, is beyond existence and non-existence. So we would say a perfect example for taking things as unique or singular is thinking of only this life. But if we think of dependent co-arising in terms of carrying over the course of many lives, we can think of things differently, that is, subject to change and dependently arisen. This famous metaphor is used by Nagarjuna in the text known as Letter to a King, Shrulika. Here Nagarjuna tells a king that if he had insight into how many lives he had already undergone, and were to make a heap of bones from each of those previous lives, that mountain of bones would be higher than Mount Meru. Yeah, Shulika, for our English translation of a Tibetan commentary to Nagarjuna's text, see Misunderstanding Golden Zephyr. Gosh, I don't even know how to. Zephyr? Translated by Leschly Kawamura. Yeah, I'm a little bit wondering whether this is, some of you might actually be more scholars than I am, if this is also what we call letter to a friend. Because I think the letter to the king is also referred to as a friendly letter. In which case we actually have a commentary also by a really good translation by Padmakara and a commentary by Kanjur Rinpoche. So I think that is also Strudlika. Anyway, so so this is just where we understand impermanence, and we look at our life in terms of something that is existing, and hence we begin to think, well, when it's no longer what I think of my life as, then it's non-existent. But the thing is that what we call this life has actually never come into absolute existence. It's really just a set of causes and conditions that have assembled what we presently experience in terms of our being, our body, on the basis of the skandhas, and then on the basis of that, then the projection of the realm and our conscious experience within that. And so this is all just, you could say, a play of causes and conditions that in no way actually exists as something that can be, or it falls outside of the parameters of existence and non-existence. Anyway, what we very often do in terms of unhinging our solidification on this life is that we meditate on impermanence. You could say a deeper way of doing it is looking at, you could say, the nature of dependent arising. So that's, we've looked at things in terms of being, what is it again? In terms of being permanent, in terms of being unique, and then the last one is then independence. And finally, Steven says, we want things to be independent as opposed to dependently arisen. Many types of meditation seem to be specific antidotes for this habit in which, thirsting and hungering for some certainty, we grab onto something as if it were permanent. As an exercise, we can imagine that our close companions, perhaps a boyfriend or girlfriend, have a past of many lives, and if their bones were right now piled in front of us, they would make a heap taller than the tallest of mountains. Yet still, we want things to be stable, to be unique and independent. For that, we can also say simply, to say that things are independent would be to say that things are unconditional. And we can see that everything exists on the basis of causes and conditions. We came into this world on the basis of causes and conditions. We are sustained by causes and conditions. Go without one meal and we will be very aware of our conditioning. So to assert independence, unconditioned existence, difficult. So to summarize this important point in Buddhism, self, Atman, is the name given to any or all of these three tendencies towards fixation. That's the technical definition. From this perspective, we might see how ego, me, and myself are simply habitual tendencies of fixation. We cling to these static notions of ourselves and others. You can see how ego and self are a bit secondary. It is said, in fact, that we grab onto this. We might call it static cling. Let's see. Atmagraha, Daktu Zimba. So that is where we have two styles of Daktu Zimba or Atmagraha, which is we fixate on person, the subjective, our sense of, our person, me, and the phenomenal world. which is then, you could say, the phenomenal field that we project as the objective dimension. And that's where we have this static cling phenomenon, the fixation on a self. We call this self of person and self of phenomena. Cutting through the fixity, anatman. Stephen says, it is said, when we begin to have insight into this obsessive clinging as the primary dynamic of suffering, then the quality of that clinging begins to break up a bit. There are two ways in which the breakup of that clinging is indicated. We will primarily focus on only one of these two ways, no self, which in Sanskrit is anatman. Tolkien Rinpoche, he says, and this is important, what we're talking about here is when we begin to have insight. This is prajna. You're hearing this and you're beginning to be, you could say, and some of you probably already have done this reflection, but you're beginning to say, this self that I think of as solid possibly is not a self. These phenomena, these persons, and so on that we think of as solid, maybe aren't that solid. And maybe I should think about that. Maybe I should actually play with this idea. Now, the moment that we do this is called reflection. And the moment that we actually settle in meditation where we don't pursue the ordinary habitual labeling that perpetuates this cycle, we are developing prajna. We're developing the sword that cuts through this. This is basically all based on analysis. It's where we begin to analyze an assumption. Anytime that you have an assumption, sure, it works beautifully until somebody challenges you, questions it. That's where you need to stop up and reevaluate. And that's where we apply analysis. So here we're reevaluating, we're analyzing, and that's where we begin to have some insight about the so-called self, this problem, this fixity. Tolkien, he compares this to because it doesn't mean that all of a sudden we analyze and then the self goes away. It doesn't mean we sort of go, spontaneous combustion or something. We're not going to be here. It doesn't mean that phenomena disappear. But there's less, and this is what Stephen says, the clinging begins to break up a bit. And Rinpoche just says, it's a bit like if we take a cloth and we dip it in acid and we pull it out again. Now the cloth might still be there, but all we need to do is actually just go and it'll start dispersing. So, of course, here we're not into sort of making people go away, but we're wanting to get to the bottom of what drives suffering. And that's where our fixity needs to be challenged. It needs to be subjected to analysis, and we need to actually break it up a bit. Like I said, this will only do good. This will enable us to see clearer, to be able to be more effective. There will be more presence of love. There'll be more softness. There'll be more tenderness. Whereas when we begin to solidify, we set up barriers, self and other, polarize, solidify, and we have a lot of trouble with that. So this is where we're softening things. We're opening up. Stephen says, this famous anatman is an insight that, according to the Tibetan tradition, has been called the basic Shravakayana insight. It defines, in part, what is meant by Shravakayana. There is a certain level of insight into how this Atman works, so that it loosens up a bit with respect to being a person. I'm probably just going to say Pudgala. Yes, Pudgala. So, which in Sanskrit, which is Sanskrit for my sense of who I am, my personality. So when we say this, I have a problem. I is already the problem. Who is this I? Is this person really permanent? Or is it not so solid or fixed? Many Buddhist practices have as their aim coming to experience this so-called person as not so permanent, unique, and independent. In fact, personhood and personality are not so fixed all the categories of the conditioned dharmas, 5 aggregates, the 12 sense bases, and the 18 elements, what we call the skandhas, the ayatanas, and the dhatus. They are the impermanent, multiple, dependent arising factors that give a full account of this so-called me and my so-called world of experience, allowing it to not be so fixed. And the benefit, what we gain, is that the upset, the veils that mask our true open-heartedness, is cut through. The veil of upset is ripped asunder by applying the analysis of these Abhidharma categories in groupings of 5, 12, 18 dharmas. We will see that this so-called me is not so fixed. The benefit is that one can rip the obscuring veil of upset when things don't go our way. So this is getting to the heart really of what is delusion. It certainly is very practical in terms of dealing with our upset, and it basically gets at the very core of the entire condition of samsara. It gets to the core of what drives suffering universally, everywhere, at all times. Very welcome to check that. This might sound as if we're sort of sitting here saying, hey, we got the answer. But this is certainly not something that should be taken at face value or just as some sort of dogmatic truth. We should check this, and we should check when it happens that we're free from this obsessive fixity, and when it is that it becomes, tight. And that's where we should begin to see this does something to the subjectivity that drives, say, all the neurosis and all the neurotic action. So this is very important. Okay, let's see if there's some questions at this point. Someone's asking, what page are you on, please? That should hopefully be. Yeah, sorry, I don't have the printed book, so in that sense, I might not be so helpful. Just remind you, I think maybe it says actually. Hold on. I don't know if you can see my screen, right? Down at the bottom, right now it says page 52 of 242. So you should be able to see the page number down at the bottom of the screen, hopefully. Is it that the delusion is not so much that what we perceive doesn't exist? It's that such existence is not permanent. Well, that's true, but that's only partially true. And that's why we're very interested in getting down to the issue of existence and non-existence. Permanence, impermanence, that is quite easy, but we're going a bit further than that. We're going right down to the notion of phenomena actually don't exist. The sofa doesn't exist. It's not just that the sofa is not going to last. It's that it doesn't exist in the first place. On the absolute level. Remember this, on the absolute level. On the relative level, yeah, the problem is with my attachment to the sofa, somebody spills in my sofa, it's as if the sofa is ruined. My sofa is ruined. That's where we attribute solidity. This politician got into office, that politician got into office, good, bad. Yes, from the relative perspective, when we're working with the causes and conditions, we need to make sure that, intelligent politicians get in. So we shouldn't become passive. But the attribution of this is evil, this is good, that's labeling it beyond just, you could say, the ordinary functioning. That's beginning to impose some sort of absolute qualities that are not there in any given phenomenon. So that's where we would say relatively all phenomena exist as they appear, but absolutely we would say they are beyond the extremes of existence and non-existence. They appear yet have no intrinsic nature. So may I ask, does contemplation for Ngundro means thinking about certain subject, not meditation? Because when meditating, we want to know what comes to our mind. But contemplation is like analyzing why life is impermanent and so on. Well, we have what we would call shamatha practice, which is settling the mind. So when we're practicing Nundro, we have the session preliminaries. Your instructor would tell you this, and if sometimes your instructor is slow in getting back to you, don't let him or her off the hook. Make sure make sure to pursue them. But the nature of contemplation in the Ngundro is actually is one of, yes, we're thinking, we are analyzing. So that's where we're not practicing settling the mind. But these contemplations are very important. So that's where we think about phenomena as impermanent. We think about the suffering of samsara. We think about karma, precious human rebirth, and so on. But when we're doing the Nundro and when we're doing any meditation, we'd want to actually start with what we call session preliminaries. And this you have in the various Nundros, a place at the beginning where you invoke the teacher, the presence of the teacher. You could say invoking sanity or invoking prajna, invoking wisdom, and then fusing mind, ordinary mind, with the wisdom of the teacher, just settling the mind. And that's not contemplation. So that's where we begin the session with this actual meditation practice of shamatha. And then we analyze. But all the way through our practice of Nundro or whatever we're doing, we need to actually have this ongoing practice of shamatha, of settling the mind, where we're not carried away by this. It's not just that we know what's in our mind, it's that we're not carried away by them. Hi, Jakob. Great topic explained by Goodman. Thank you for presenting. When talking and contemplating on the existence and non-existence of things, I always come to this question, or perhaps this conclusion. Seems to me that there's only one thing that is truly existent and never changing, and that is the nature of mind, or Buddha nature. Does this contradict the logic somehow? Thank you. Well, for us to understand the nature of mind, it's necessary that we understand that it's not something that can be understood in terms of existence and non-existence. So that's where even nature of mind doesn't fall into these categories of existence and non-existence. It's also not the nature of any given phenomenon, actually. And that's where we need to begin to habituate our mind to go beyond these fixations. And that is essential for understanding nature of mind. And of course, we talk about the nature of mind, but what's really deceptive, and actually in Tibet, there was a lot of very intelligent debate around this, is that we cannot attribute solid inherent existence to Buddha nature or the nature of mind. It's beyond that. It doesn't have any inherent nature. And so as much as in the Buddha nature teaching, we would say that it is true, permanent, etc., it does so on the basis of what we would call the prasangika madhyamika reasoning that establishes the complete lack of inherent existence. But of course, the wisdom that recognizes that, which is free from delusion, yes, we could, it has then the nature which is unconditional in the sense that it just doesn't fall into delusion. But as long as we're delusional and we're attributing solidity to things, somebody needs to come along and sort of ring the bell, or just like we're in a movie and tap us on the shoulder and saying, hey, it's just a movie, it doesn't exist. So that's why we need this critique that we have in the middle way reasoning, or that Steven is presenting here. We need to have this, otherwise we're just going to be deceived and fooled. Please excuse my stupid question. Let me just say there's no such a thing as a stupid question, okay? Everything here, and I would say if you ask a stupid question, you're being a very compassionate person, because there might be some who are shy to ask what they think is a stupid question. And if you ask the question, you're actually not just helping yourself, but you're helping other people as well. So please, please don't ever think that any question is stupid. Yeah. Okay. Now, are the terms mind and Buddha nature used interchangeably, or are they different? Well, we would say mind in general is a very broad term that refers to our, you could say, psychological condition. And Buddha nature is that which actually is beyond anything that is conditioned. So Buddha nature is beyond our ordinary psychology. But of course, you know, it depends how people are using it, you know. And so, you know, when we say the nature of mind, that is actually that something which is beyond the mind. So it's really just about, it's a little bit a question of vocabulary. I wouldn't say it's about semantics, but it's about what in Buddhism we are using as particular words. And of course, that's where in Tibetan it's quite clear. But of course, in the West, where we're not, you know, you could say language hasn't evolved around Buddhism the way that language evolved around Buddhism in Tibet, then mind can mean so many different things. So that's, forget about Western languages, but in Buddhism, strictly within Buddhism, then mind would generally refer to these, you could say, all these aspects of our Buddhist psychology and all these various kinds of what we see here, basically in everything we see here in these four rows, in these forms, mind, concomitant factors, and elements, neither substantial. All of these, they fall into the category of mind. But what we're going on, when we talk about Buddha nature, then we go over in column 5, that which is beyond. Okay. Okay. Arhat, to have conquered the enemy. Now, one of my friends was very upset that we use the word, what is it in, overcome the enemy wrongdoing. You know, in our dedication, you know, when we have this line, as we have in the dedication, right? We say, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. My friend, who didn't understand, this is a metaphor, thought in Buddhism they have a very militant language, and the thing is, we're just again coming back to the bad guy. We're not really saying any ultimate bad guy, but it's just this is what drives suffering. So someone who generally causes us suffering, such as somebody who hurts us, we tend to regard them as enemies. And so that's where we use the term conquering the enemy. And so when we in Buddhism talk about someone who's achieved great spiritual accomplishment, we refer to such a person as an arhat. This is very much within the traditions of what we, from the Mahayana perspective, call Hinayana, where we would say the arhat really just is someone who achieves peace, but is not necessarily enlightened. So there's not the notion that the arhat is perfectly enlightened, but there is the notion of having overcome what drives suffering. And so that's where Ar refers to enemy, and Hunt, actually Ari Hunt, refers to the one that has slain or killed or conquered the enemy. Ar being enemy and Hunt being then the slaying or the conquering. So Steven says, to conclude this section, the name given to that stable state in which the veil of upset has been thoroughly cut through, Klesha Avarana, the goal according to the Shravakayana tradition is said to be the state of being an arhat, a noble one who has conquered the foe of emotional upset. Arhat is glossed as foe destroyer. Let's see here. Yeah, here we have it. Arhat, Ari, enemy, and Hanta, to kill. Yeah. So that's the so that's this term of accomplishment. Let's see here. Sorry. It is said that through this basic practice of seeing through the fixity of the personality, one cuts through the crippling effect of emotional upset, so that you have slain this enemy. The enemy is upset itself, right? So this is just what we mean with the notion of accomplishment as slaying the enemy. And this is also something we have in the way of the Bodhisattva, where Shantideva says, ordinary enemies, the max they can do is just put an end to this life. But this enemy of the kleshas, That's something that we actually harbor in our heart, and that lifetime after lifetime puts us in to suffering that goes beyond anything that an ordinary enemy, even the most cruel, sadistic enemy, could ever subject us to. So, stuckness of habit patterns. In these Buddhist traditions, and also in Western forms of psychotherapy meant to help those whose ego has been damaged, the damage is understood to be an inability based on a kind of stuckness of patterns. The point is not to be stuck and to learn how to become unstuck. What then would Buddhists say about the Western notion of the necessity of having a healthy ego? A healthy ego from the Abhidharma point of view consists entirely of having stabilized those conditioned factors in the category called wholesome factors or positive mental factors. These include factors such as confidence, self-respect, decorum, equanimity, and so on. I'm so glad Steven says this, because we might say, hey, Western notion of healthy ego and Buddhism is incompatible. But again, that's really an example of semantics, because healthy ego is exactly like Steven saying, well, there's nothing not to like about a healthy ego. It doesn't mean big, fat, horrible, self-centered, narcissistic, sociopathic ego. It means just that there's not the neurotic component that's, you could say, ridden by insecurity and aggression and so forth. So the notion of a healthy ego is not necessarily something that we as Buddhists could say, hey, wait a minute, we don't do ego at all. It's just, again, semantics. And within Western understanding of, you could say, Western understanding of phenomenology, the Western understanding of how we exist in terms of our consciousness, well, then it's a given that there is a self. Going back to Descartes, cogito ergo sum. Yeah, I think, therefore I am. Simple as that. And so, of course, Buddhists, they would say, well, I think, therefore I think. We would say, and those thoughts, they seem to be differing. And on the basis of them differing, very hard to assert any, what have we again? Permanent, unique, and unconditioned self, right? So, but that being a given, then, that we presently within Western, psychology and phenomenology assert a self, that's fine then. But what we then talk about, ego and so on, doesn't really come with the same insight that we have in the Buddhist context. So again, that's why it's quite that we could be perfectly happy with the notion of healthy ego. We could say the Dalai Lama has a healthy ego, if you like, So, the Buddhist view of personality. If you ask a Buddhist what the Buddhist view of personality is, there are possibly two extreme responses. One extreme response would be, there is no such a thing as personality. But if a psychologist asks a Buddhist to elaborate and pointed out certain recurring features of that Buddhist behavior, which anyone can see, and also inquired about their habitual ways of thinking, their habits of hopes and fears, that psychologist might awaken the Buddhist from his dogmatic slumber of thinking that there is no personality. In that case, then, that Buddhist might reply differently. They might say, oh, now I see what you have pointed out. Well, we Buddhists say with respect to that, get over it. Now, this does sound like a very sad case of a very, you could say, rather confused Buddhist, but yes, there could be someone who basically, on not understanding the two truths, would basically say there's no such a thing as personality. Well, that's just sort of, you say, parroting the absolute, but failing to recognize humbly that there is a certain relative personality that applies. So that's a rather confused Buddhist here, but of course we have the potential for being confused. And we might also then again, this sad Buddhist there is someone who then says, rather than understanding that this is something that's going to take a long time, sort of brings into this discussion a sort of moralism. and says, well, get over it. And that also doesn't work. We're not going to get over it. We need prajna to get over it. But this is sort of putting things, you could say, in an extreme context. So that is where certainly this Buddhist has been very much helped by his psychologist or her psychologist friend. Steven says, this exemplifies the two possible views some students of Buddhism have with respect to the existence or non-existence of a personality. Either response may, in fact, be regarded as unskillful or unhelpful depending on the situation. As the Buddha reminds us, we should communicate according to the temperament and openness of those we encounter. And the Buddhist teachers do tend to teach according to the circumstance and capacity of those present. So that's where a skillful Buddhist teacher, of course, will say, oh yeah, very good to have healthy ego. You know, we in Buddhism see it slightly different, but according to where you're coming from, healthy ego sounds like a good thing. Okay, hey, let's stop on this note. See if there's any questions. I have a few minutes left. A question. Okay. All right. Sorry, this is a personal question. Okay, let's see. Right. Okay. So answer is yes. And may I ask when the retreat will open? We don't have any retreats right now because of the COVID-19 situation. We were going to have retreats down in Melbourne. We're going to have also a retreat in Melbourne in end of January, but I think this won't happen. We might possibly have a retreat up in the Blue Mountains. But anyway, check out the website. If you're asking about Siddhartha's intent, basically anything right now, and also the retreat over in New Zealand. In New Zealand, that's not happening. I was going to be a retreat in New Zealand down on the South Island near Nelson, which has been cancelled again because of COVID. Yeah, but check the website. And some of you, I'd like to say, I apologize for sometimes being really slow in getting back to you with emails. I get a lot of emails, so I apologize if sometimes there's a little bit of delay in answering. Is an arhat free from rebirth in samsara? Yes. That's how we would generally say, and that's that's very interesting because that is exactly the thing about the arhat. Whereas the bodhisattva will be reborn in samsara, but the bodhisattva will not be reborn as a confused person, but out of compassion, the bodhisattva enters samsara without being entangled in the confusion of samsara. So we say out of wisdom, the bodhisattva is free of samsara, and out of compassion, the bodhisattva is free of nirvana. Is healthy ego equivalent to behaving to what is considered normal behavior to the greater community of humans? Yeah, pretty much, yes. You could say the outcome of and the objective of psychology in general is a healthy ego, and that is then what we could consider having a normal, gratifying life. So that's the sort of general notion. Isn't there a line in one of the sutras about an arhat when reciting the names of the Buddha, Tathagata Arhat? Yes, that's true. It's true. We do refer to the Buddha as an arhat, isn't it? Yes, he is that, but also so much more. So we could say Socrates is a man, but then again, so much more. You know? So I think that's just one of the epithets of the Buddha, the great arhat. Lama Tenpa Chomdende Deshin Che. We would say Lama, what is it again? Teacher, Bhagavan, Arhat, Tathagata. Yeah, yeah. But then again, so yes, the Buddha is Arhat, but also more than that. All right. Toltec interpreter, he would say sometimes in Mahayana context, there's a little bit of a uh, chauvinistic attitude about arhats, and he said if ever we were to meet an actual arhat, we would be blown away. So this is not just some, you could say, uh, how do you say, amateur yogi of any kind. The arhat is a great being, but still there is this leaning towards just wanting personal peace. Okay. So we'll conclude this session then with dedication. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Thank you. We will have, as usual, just a couple of minutes break, and then I'll say something about meditation. So today I'd actually like to use a text from one of the great masters of Tibetan Buddhism in recent time. His own is Dujum Rinpoche, Jigjo Lieshe Dorje. And in this way, I mean, generally when I present meditation, it's completely in concordance with the instructions I've received. I emphasize a lot of the methods from Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who I think is brilliant teacher of meditation, and instructions from Tsongsa Gyalmyen Khyentse Rinpoche, and also other masters, Kyabje Dingu Khyentse Rinpoche, and so on. So usually what I present is you could say it's not my own invention, but it's very often articulated, which in a way that I hope is useful for those of you present in this program. But I would, of course, and again, my sole intention really with everything I do is that you have some sense of belonging with regards to the lineage and the incredible heritage that we have, and that you can get over, you could say, the apparent differences in discourse and language and so on. But I think this text here certainly is very clear. So I thought just to read through this, and this is, I'll put this up in the resource folder. And by the way, if ever I promise to put something up there and I don't, please just let me know. The play of thought. Kyabje, meaning Lord Refuge. Dujum Rinpoche, meaning the previous Dujum Rinpoche, Jigjal Yeshe Dorje. And Kyabje Dujum Rinpoche says, since all experiences of suffering and happiness come from our actions, and the positive or negative nature of such actions depends on our motivation, it is therefore essential to master our mind. Yet the subjugation of our mind cannot be accomplished by physical force. We must control our mind so as to be able to abandon an action as soon as we recognize it is harmful. We must realize that the harm we do to others is in fact done to ourselves, even if that does not seem to be the case in the short term. So we really understand that everything we do is driven on what's behind the action, our motivation, the mind. And to master that mind, subjugation here of the mind means subjugating the self-centered, neurotic, deluded mind. But that mind cannot be, like Tugujin would say, we can't blow it away with bombs and explosives. It has to be something that where we simply just see through the delusion. But we need to start off recognizing the harm that this deluded mind does. Kyabje Dingyur just says, when a thought arises, it brings another with it, and then another, in an endless sequence. We must break the chain of thoughts by letting them dissolve by themselves. It is this chain which has deceived us from beginningless time, and if we do not break it, it will continue to deceive us in the future. Now, this chain doesn't mean that, to break this chain doesn't mean that we're going to stop thoughts, but it means that we stop being distracted by the thoughts and we just mindlessly tag along with thoughts that arise in our mind. And that's where mindfulness is, where we intervene and actually become present in the presence of thoughts without necessarily then tagging along with them. It's basically becoming intelligent in the midst of all this chain of thoughts. And that is what we mean with breaking the chain. Kyabje Dunjuma says, the mind is the base from which thoughts rise up. It is impossible to stop them. We must remain at ease, the body quite relaxed, silent, paying attention not to follow thoughts, whether good or bad. In that state of ease, the mind keeps watch over the mind. If we remain in that state of tranquility, making no effort whatsoever to restrain our thoughts of the past or the future, we experience a tranquil clarity which is similar to an ocean without waves. The mind resting in the mind is known as a Nepa Abiding. And this is what we achieve with shamatha practice. This is where we're not stopping thoughts, but we're not carried away by them. And from that point of view, then we are really just resting. And so initially, we normally would say first we have a lot of thoughts, a lot of distractions, and we're very sort of overpowered by the thoughts. But when we practice just relaxing into just whatever arises and not being tagging along with them blindly, then we achieve this sense of just being at rest. So this is what we call abiding. That is, you could say, resting then in the natural condition of peace. His Holiness Abhidharma just says, leave the mind in that state, like a clear lake. On its motionless surface, a change then appears, like a soft breeze rippling the surface of the water. This is called movement. And if we allow ourselves to be carried away by it, we shall go astray, as previously explained. So this is where, as we're sitting and we're aware, then of course thoughts arise. But if we recognize, then it really doesn't disturb us. But if we are carried away, and this is what we mean with lost in thought, carried away, etc., that's where we lose it. And that is where this when this movement comes, then it becomes distraction. But movement itself is not the problem. The problem is the distraction. Abhidharma says, if we do not recognize stillness, it will be impossible for us to recognize movement. So that's where first, when we're meditating, we need to first accustom ourselves to just being settled and to not be carried away by the thoughts. Abhidharma says, in the depth of the mind, something exists which is able to recognize stillness and movement at the same time. That is called rigpa, or awareness. During meditation, we must neither reject nor follow movement. Having recognized stillness, we can let the mind return there each time. By remaining at ease, whatever the change takes place, the movement will dissolve by itself, like the wave which forms on the surface of the ocean and which subsides into it again. Trying to stop the movement when it occurs only makes the thought more powerful. So this is like, oh, I don't want to think about that. You know how we sometimes say that? I don't want to think about that. Oh, let's not go there, or whatever. Or we have a problem just with mere thoughts. It just solidifies it. The moment that we're just sort of, accepting, then it loses its power. So again, His Holiness says, trying to stop a movement when it occurs only makes the thought more powerful. So we must never resist the movement, but return to the previous experience of tranquility, thanks to awareness. Just as stirring the limpid water of a lake only disturbs the water, likewise, there is no possibility of clarity if the thoughts are constantly agitated. So when thoughts arise and we begin to react to them, then that's where it begins that we become agitated. But if we just remain with this recognition, we're not particularly interested in whether there's movement in the mind or it's quiet mind, but we're just aware, then we don't actually have any problem with movement. And that's where we just naturally sustain this tranquility. The meditation is called shine, or in Sanskrit, shamatha. In English, then, His Holiness continues, or mental calm. And that is the base of all meditations. Thanks to this practice, the onslaught of thoughts will calm down. This does not mean that the thoughts will cease to arise, but they will no longer affect us, nor destroy our serenity. And this is where Shantideva, he says, I fold my hands. Please maintain this awareness. And it is something that is so important. There's a big difference between doing all sorts of Buddhist stuff and then being a meditator. what His Holiness would very much want us to do is become something that's very rare among Buddhists, which is a meditator. A meditator is not affected by the psychological material. The meditator has the same experience as everyone else, and yet doesn't get carried away or doesn't react. So this provides for tremendous softness, intelligence, empathy, compassion, and strength. Chapter Junjunmada says, at present, the thoughts which assail us are so present, so persistent that we feel obliged to follow them. The practice of mental calm wears away the aggressivity of thoughts, so that it is progressively easier for us not to depart from serenity. By getting used to that, we shall be so relaxed in meditation that the desire to move will disappear. A great sense of well-being will invade us, and we shall desire never to leave that state. Even when practiced in the dark, this practice brings an experience of total clarity, similar to a nascent dawn. Actually, there literally were practitioners, and still are practitioners, who would actually literally sit in the dark. But the thing is, they don't experience sitting in the dark. Anyway, that's getting a little bit ahead of things, but this is really just to say that this clarity that we could become familiar with enables us to continually carry with us a sense of just being at ease with our reality. If we practice meditation, these three experiences, bliss, clarity, and the state of mind without thoughts, will not fail to arise at some point. So we talk about these usually as bliss, clarity, and non-thought. And like His Holiness says elsewhere, there's no way that they won't arise. Now, he says, if that does not occur, it means that either we're not practicing correctly or that we have not trained enough. It could be that we experience a somber, heavy feeling during this practice, as if our head were covered by a hood. This resembles a state of boredom, in which there are no thoughts. If that state emerges, we should shake ourselves, sit up, imbue our heart with great intensity, and look up rather than down. So if we become stuck in this dull, zombie-like condition, that's where we need to have more light, maybe have more cool environment, and we should be focused and motivated, which is why also we very often at the beginning of meditation session invoke the teacher or invoke the Buddha. The best method for eliminating obstacles during meditation is that of devotion to the Lama. Thanks to this, our mind becomes one with the mind of the Lama. It is not a matter of mixing one thing with another, but rather pouring water into water. Just as space enclosed by the hands, becomes identical to the external space once the hands are parted, so also there is no difference between our mind and that of the Lama. He or her is not better, ours is not impure. Such differences do not exist. This is really the secret of meditation. So there's no difference between the wisdom of the Lama and our basic ground nature. And this basic ground nature is what we're invoking on the basis of thinking of the Lama or thinking of the Buddha. But why this works beautifully is because ultimately the nature of the Guru's mind and our mind is not in any way different. Oh, and that's it. Wait, I see. So it's a very beautiful note to end on. And this is also why at the beginning of the session then we invoke the teacher in the form of Buddha Shakyamuni. So basically here, His Holiness Rinpoche has talked about three aspects of meditation, what we call dwelling, which is just being present, allowing the mind, being present with without being carried away by thoughts, and then when thoughts arise, to not be distracted. And what enables us to not be distracted when there is the arising of thoughts, or what we call movement, is awareness. So we talk about stillness, which is this condition of presence. Then there is the movement that arises, and then there is awareness that essentially enables movement to not lead us into distraction. And so for us to begin to approach this experience, we need to have the conditions that allow us to not be distracted. And we might say, oh, I'm going to, be aware in my everyday life. Very difficult. And that's where it's very helpful to actually have some sitting practice. And this we can do in many different ways. When we do it as a group, then we'd actually, have periods of 20 minutes or half an hour or whatever, how long we do it. Of course, when we're on our own, then it's quite important that we just keep it fresh, that there is this presence of mind in which when movement arises, it doesn't, you could say, proliferate or drag us into, or in which we get lost in the movement. And that's when we have this lack of awareness. And what enables us then to prevent movement from seducing us or dragging us into distraction is this awareness. So knowing these three aspects, stillness, the calm of the mind, movement, which is the natural display of the mind, and awareness, being able to work with these three is really the secret to what we call shamatha meditation. And it actually goes beyond shamatha. So for us then to imbue or bring this practice onto the path as something that goes beyond just becoming calm and all of that, to actually have genuine heart, we invoke the presence of the teacher, we invoke the Buddha, not just that it's a condition of our mind, a sort of a temporary experience, but it really touching on something that deeply rings true. And that is where the presence of the teacher is essential in terms of lifting our mind, in terms of creating a dimension that's beyond ordinary consciousness. And that is what we then refer to as blessing. But ultimately, we recognize that the Buddha, the teacher, our own mind is inseparable in this basic primordial purity. Okay, let's see if there's any questions at this point. Okay, it's good if it's helpful. Thank you. So, okay, now I'll just go over a little the structure of the practice we're doing. We always do, but usually here there's 5 minutes left, so I'll just go over it. What we do when we start the practice, which is then what we call the treasury of blessing, treasury of blessings. Actually, it is the treasury of blessings. Anyway, we first take refuge, which is taking refuge in the Buddha as the teacher means that we're going to get to the bottom of this. We're taking refuge in the awakened state. We're not taking refuge in just some sort of something that would temporarily put us at ease. Or taking refuge in the Buddha is really determination to follow through to complete awakening. And then our motivation is really not just our own peace, but really the enlightenment of all sentient beings. So this magnanimous, courageous attitude is what we develop. So we'll say the first 2 lines is taking refuge. The second 2 lines is developing bodhicitta. When we would say by the merit of practicing generosity and so on, we're actually talking about the 6 paramitas. So this is a way of, you could say, cultivating bodhicitta. Particularly it's associated with the bodhicitta of activity or application, which is generosity, discipline, patience, endeavor or energy, meditation, and prajna, wisdom. So with that, with these 6, then we can achieve Buddhahood. But we do so really with the intention of liberating all sentient beings. So this we chant 3 times. And then we have these 4 unbounded attitudes. Wishing sentient beings be happy, wish they be free of suffering, wishing that they always have freedom from suffering, and that we wishing that them be free of this you could say toxic condition of likes and dislike, and just be free from attachment and aversion, that they may dwell in equanimity. And then, having done that, we visualize the Buddha surrounded by students, and this is then what we have here in the tanka. And then we have this beautiful devotional supplication, which essentially is gathered within what we call 7 aspects of puja, or 7 aspects of 7-limb prayer or whatever. But it's really 7 ways of service, you could say. It is bowing down, it's making offerings, it's parting from our neurotic patterns, it's rejoicing in others' practice, it's requesting that the teachers don't pass into nirvana, and requesting that the teachers teach, and then requesting that they don't pass into nirvana. And then on the basis of that we then supplicate the Buddha. Again, we have the external reference of the Buddha, but of course what we're doing here is the Buddha as a teacher, someone who shows something to us. But with that, invoking the vivid presence of the Buddha, then we're creating an atmosphere of blessing. And that's where on the basis of that, we go beyond the ordinary, you could say, entanglement of our ordinary thoughts, narratives, fixations, and so on. So it creates for a vast condition of mind. So, but of course, that's not just you just chant this and you're going to have an open state of mind. It really comes from there being a lot of heart in it. So that's why we have this devotional chant, and then we have the dharani, the longer and the shorter dharani. And then at the end, then we fuse with the Buddha, and we relinquish any reference point to the Buddha as being external, and simply settling into this. We actually do this with an aspiration that we won't again get caught up in confusion. And then we conclude with a long, beautiful aspiration prayer, which actually comes from the Avatamsaka Sutra, flower ornament scripture, and then also some additional concluding prayers. So that's what we're going to be doing. So that's a little bit about the structure that we're of our practice here. Okay. Let's see if there's some questions. I find I can get no mind for a few moments, and then I realize I have. And the second I realize it, I lose it. I have the thought that I have no mind. How do I stop this? The having no mind or having mind, that's just thoughts. We just come back to the simplicity of the breath. We give less and less. We give less and less importance to this mind that labels, oh, that's a special state of mind, or this is an ordinary state of mind. That's just movement. And so us recognizing just that there is thoughts without being entangled, and this is where it's quite helpful to come back to just the breath, the simplicity of that, because that's beyond any concepts. Then thoughts may arise. There might be good thoughts, bad thoughts. There might be the thoughts, oh, you're having no thoughts, you're having no mind. Or you might have sort of some sense of, oh, this is a really mystical experience. And then there might be the thought, I'm having a very not mystical domestic experience of shopping for food and loo paper or whatever. And we might think, oh, there's a hierarchy between the spiritual thoughts and the non-spiritual thoughts. All of these are just thoughts, and we have no preference. And that's why we just come back to the simplicity of the breath. We also, when we're invoking the teacher, then also there is really some sense of just by the presence of the teacher, ordinary concerns fall away. The Treasury of Blessings should have been uploaded, but if it hasn't, then please hassle me. And once again, I apologize to some of you. I think I Oh, I've been lacking in communications, and apologies, but usually if you hassle me about something like this, I usually get it done. So, but I do actually think that it's up there. Yeah. Okay. Do we need to take a deep breath at the beginning of meditation? No, 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 no. Or sometimes I find I'm distracted, then I take a deep breath. Is it that's fine. If that works, that's totally okay. But we don't particularly need to. But yeah, actually, letting out a deep breath can be okay at the beginning of meditation. That's fine. Yeah. I mean, as you know, in Nundu practice, then we have what we call the exhalation of the stale prana. So it's a bit like that. That's fine. Okay, 2-minute break and then we'll begin. Thanks. Okay, we'll begin. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the sacred happiness devoid of suffering. And may they dwell in boundless equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion. Ah, as the union of unborn emptiness and the ceaseless appearances of interdependence, magically there appears before me in the sky, amidst vast clouds of offering, on a jewel-lined throne and lotus sun and moon disk seats, the incomparable teacher Lion of the Shakyas, his body the color of gold adorned with major and minor marks. Clad in the 3 Dharma robes, he sits in Vajra posture, his right hand gracefully poised in the earth-touching mudra, and his left hand in the gesture of meditation, holding its alms bowl full of nectar. Like a mountain of gold, magnificent, he shines in splendor, spreading beams of wisdom light across the whole expanse of space. The 8 close suns, 16 elders, and the like, a vast ocean-like retinue of noble beings encircles him all around. Simply think of him and he grants the glorious of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the 2 extremes. He is the great being, perfect embodiment of every source of refuge. With your great compassion, you embrace this turbulent and degenerate world and made 500 mighty aspirations. You are as exalted as the white lotus. Whoever hears your name shall never return to samsara. Most compassionate teacher, to you I pay homage. All my own and others' virtues of body, speech, and mind, together with all our possessions, visualized like Samantabhadra's offering clouds, I offer to you. All the harmful actions and transgressions I have committed throughout beginningless time, each and every one I now confess with intense and heartfelt regret. In all virtuous actions of the noble ones and ordinary beings, accumulated throughout the past, present, and future, I rejoice. Turn the wheel of the profound and vast Dharma teachings, ceaselessly and in every direction, I pray. Your wisdom body is like space and remains changeless throughout the past, present, and future. Yet in the perception of those to be guided, you go through the display of birth and death. Even so, let your form body continue always to appear. Through all the virtues I have accumulated in the past, am accumulating now, and will accumulate in the future, for the sake of benefiting all beings who are as infinite as space, may you, the sovereign of Dharma, be forever pleased, and may all attain the state of the victorious one, the Lord of Dharma. Living beings like us, adrift in this degenerate age, have no guidance nor protection. Because of your kindness, caring for us with surpassing compassion, every manifestation in this world now of the three jewels is your enlightened activity. You are then our only refuge, incomparable, supreme. So from our hearts we pray, with total confidence and faith, do not neglect the great promises you made in times gone by, but hold us until we attain enlightenment with your compassion. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Te yata muni muni mahamunaya soha. 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 Om 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 muni muni mahamunaya soha. Muni Muni Mahamuni. So from the Buddha's body there emanates a great radiance, a multicolored rays of wisdom light, dispelling all our own and others' obscurations and causing all the genuine qualities of the Mahayana path to arise within us, so that we attain the level of perfection from which we will never return again to samsara. Prostrate to all the Buddhas and to the Bodhisattvas endowed with the divine eye of the sages and to the Shravakas as well. I prostrate to Bodhicitta, which counteracts birth in all low realms, perfectly shows the path to the higher realms, and leads to no aging nor death. Whatever negative actions I have done under the influence of an afflicted mind, in the presence of the Buddhas I fully acknowledge them all. By the accumulation of any merit I have created through the three kinds of activities, may my seed of omniscience grow, and may I attain awakening that never ends. Whatever offerings to the Buddhas that can be found in realms of the 10 directions are known to the Buddhas who rejoice in them. I rejoice in all these offerings. I fully acknowledge all negative actions and rejoice in all merit. I prostrate to all the Buddhas. May I attain supreme primordial wisdom. I earnestly request the Bodhisattvas who reside on the 10 levels, in all the direction of the worlds in the 10 directions, to awaken into supreme enlightenment. Once you have awakened into genuine enlightenment and tamed the Maras and their hordes, may you turn the wheel of Dharma so that all living beings may be healed. With the sound of the great Dharma drum, may you free all sentient beings who are suffering. Throughout the inconceivable millions of kalpas, may you remain and teach the Dharma, mired in the swamp of desire, entangled in the strands of cyclic existence. I am fettered by all that binds. I supplicate those, supreme among humans, to look upon me. The Buddhas do not blame sentient beings who are flawed. With a loving heart for all sentient beings, may the Buddhas free them from the ocean of cyclic existence. Any perfect Buddhas who are present, those who have passed away and those yet to come, may I train following in their way and engage in enlightened conduct. Having perfected the 6 paramitas, may I liberate the 6 families of sentient beings. Having actualized the 6 extraordinary faculties, may I reach unexcelled enlightenment. Future phenomena are not born, and those past will not occur. Present phenomena have no inherent nature. There is no actual location. There is no perception. There are no outer things. May I realize the Dhamma Dhatu of emptiness. According to the Buddhas, the great sages, there are no truly existent sentient beings nor life force. There is no truly existent individual and no nurturing of a self. May I realize the Dhammata, where the self is not present. An entity such as grasping on to a self and mine is not present within any of the paramitas. To benefit all sentient beings, may I give with generosity free of avarice. Since things do not exist as entities, may my wealth appear spontaneously. Since all things totally disintegrate, may I perfect the paramita of generosity. Endowed with a flawless ethics that is guided by rules, and an ethics that is completely pure, with an ethics free of an arrogant mind, may I perfect the paramita of ethics. Just as the elements of earth, water, fire, and wind, bodhisattvas do not remain caught by mental constructs. By attaining patience, anger never arises. May I perfect the paramita of patience. Through the power of previous perseverance, having become stable, enthusiastic, and free of laziness, and through a strong body and mind, may I perfect the paramita of perseverance. Through the samadhi where all is illusion-like, through the samadhi of the hero's stride, and through the samadhi that is like a vajra, may I perfect the paramita of meditative concentration. Through actualizing the 3 gates of full liberation, the equal nature of the 3 times, and the 3 types of knowing as well, may I perfect the paramita of prajna. Through persevering in a bodhisattva's practice, may I attain the kaya praised by all the Buddhas, the luminous kaya and the kaya blazing with majesty. Thus may my intention be fulfilled. May I be, like the famed Maitreya, who engaged in such a practice, perfect the paramitas and abides at the zenith of the 10th level. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. May the Buddha appear in this world. May the light of the teaching shine like the sun. May the holders of the teaching live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. We pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their precious lives to be long. We pray for their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachers. Akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyat jagadukani nignata. Akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyat jagadukani nignata. Tavan mama stiti bhuyat jagadukani nignata. Tavan mama stiti bhuyat jagadukani nignata. As long as space remains, as long as the world remains, may I too remain to alleviate the sufferings of the world. Thank you. Thank you for joining this study here tonight. See you again. Bye.